Welcome back to Harmonize Your Life Conversations on Self Care for Women of Color podcast with your host, Dr. Toni G. Alvarado. I am so delighted to have you here with us this week for another conversation on self care, health, wellness, mental health. Um, as we are moving in out of the month of September into the month of October, our mental health is so important and that we need to discuss how that all plays into our self-care, our overall health and wellness. I am glad to be able to close out this month of conversations with our guests for today. And we will be right back in just a moment with our guests right after this. Okay, so our podcast guest today, our dialogue partner, if you will, is Dr. Cassandra L. Simmons. And I'm going to read her bio to you as I introduce her to our audience today. And I know that the conversation that we're going to have today and our topic for today is one that hopefully you will find interest in and hopefully find it to be very helpful. Things that you may be able to apply to your own life or certainly help those in your family, your friends, or those that you are charged to care for or lead. So, Dr. Cassandra L. Simmons grew up in the inner city of Cleveland, Ohio, what seemed to be a cliche portrayed by the media. Dr. Simmons was living in the reality of a neighborhood plagued with crime, poverty, and an epidemic of substance abuse. With the tenacity to overcome adversity and the support of many, she used her drive to overcome and become who she is today. Dr. Simmons earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and sociology from Georgetown College in Georgetown, Kentucky. In 2014, she earned her master's in clinical forensic psychology, followed by the doctorate in clinical forensic psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in 2018. Shortly after graduating, Dr. Simmons completed her postdoctoral fellowship at the Illinois Department of Human Services Treatment and Detention Facility, where she provided sex offender specific treatment. In addition, Dr. Simmons is a licensed associate sex offender treatment provider for the state of Illinois. Her background lies in conducting trauma based therapy with children, adolescents, and adults in community based forensic settings. Dr. Simmons, is a drug abuse program coordinator for the Department of Justice and is an adjunct professor with Grand Canyon University College of Humanities and Social Sciences. Dr. Simmons is a strong minded individual who enjoys working alongside others who share her desire and passion for mental health. As an inspirational and motivational speaker, she utilizes her childhood experiences, education, and clinical knowledge to inspire and motivate others. She has several publications that she has written and authored. Her dissertation can be found on ProQuest Dissertation Publishing, and it is available there on ProQuest. It is entitled The Powerful Voices That Go Unheard, an exploration of African American grandmothers with a plenary guardianship through the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. So you can look up her work there. She is also a contributing author to Speak It Now, Affirmations for Self-Care, Self-Worth, and Self-Value on Zulon Press, authored by Dr. Lavelle Hardy. It's also available on Amazon and Target. Um, and you can book her. You'll find out later where you can find her and book her for speaking engagements. We actually met at the I Love Me on Purpose conference in Chicago with Dr. LaVale Hardy. And I knew after hearing her speak at that conference that she would be a wonderful dialogue partner for our podcast community. All right. Welcome, Dr. Cassandra L. Simmons. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. I was like, oh, that's me. You talking about me?
You're a bad girl.
I'm okay.
You're all right, girl. You're doing it.
Thank you.
You're doing it. Well, thank you for coming on with us today. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast and agreeing to be a part of our September podcast community and conversations that we're having this month. This is as you know, as I said to you when I invited you, that our podcast conversations are designed to help. Specifically, we are targeting women of color through our podcast. While we recognize and we are certainly open to any woman that wants to be a part of these conversations, listen to these conversations, and even dialogue with us. We've had other women from other ethnic groups be dialogue partners with us because we know we can't do this work by ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
Right. But our target audience has been women of color because we recognized last year in this pandemic how impactful this pandemic, the devastating impact this pandemic had on our community, on communities of color, because of a lot of pre-existing conditions, comorbidities that many of our people carry, our communities carry. We know a lot of that is systemic. We know a lot of that has a lot to do with food deserts in our communities and healthcare justice that needs to take place in this country. But we also recognize that there's some lifestyle issues that need to be addressed in our community, so that we can take our self-care, our health, and our wellness, our mental health, not leave that up to other people and other people groups to help us, but that we can internally help our community, help ourselves, and then help one another.
Yeah.
And so in listening to you at the, as I stated, we met at the I Love Me on Purpose conference there in Chicago just a few weeks ago, back in August. And listening to you talk and sharing the panel with you, I just knew that you would, in the work that you're doing. When I heard about your work, I was like, wow, she'd be a great person to bring to our podcast audience. And I specifically today wanted us to talk about your work, and particularly the work you do with historical trauma.
Okay.
And so as we are talking today, I want us to talk about that subject of resolving historical trauma. And so as a launching pad for our conversation, can you just talk to us about your work in trauma-based therapy and your work with children, with adolescents, adults, and maybe why you went into this type of work?
Yeah, sure. So usually before I start any presentation, I like to acknowledge one woman in my life. It's so many women that have just blessed me. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about my mother. She is an amazing woman, Regina Davis Simmons. She is the reason that I am with you today. So I always say that, I am because she is. I stand because she still stands, and then I teach because she has always taught me.
Yes.
I just want to put that. I want to just dedicate this presentation to her for that.
Let me just put a pin there and say I'm so glad you did that, because really all month long there's been a thread woven in our conversations this month that has to do with our mothers, our grandmothers. We'll be in the beginning of the month, we talked with Dr. Sienna Leith about the strength motif that has been passed down through to women of color, and
Right.
how that started with our mothers and grandmothers, and how, how that has been injurious to Black girls and Black
Yeah.
women. And then Deanna Boyd came to us and talked to us about understanding, hear our mothers cry, and understanding our mother's story.
Yeah.
I'm always, giving homage to my mother, who recently went home to be with the Lord,
Mhm.
but recognizing just how important our mothers are to
Yeah.
our story and our journey. And so I applaud you for starting out by paying homage to your mother.
Well, thank you. I'm sure whenever she listens to this, I'm sure she's gonna be like, "Girl, you had me on there." Yes, girl, I got you on. I'm putting you on the map. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of how I got into the trauma-based stuff. So when I went to Georgetown, I started out as a chemistry major. And then I went through that first course and I was like, oh, this is too much. So
Uh-huh,
I
uh-huh.
went on I was taking a psychology course at the time and just kind of felt my way through that. But it wasn't until a graduate school where I learned, I had an internship with Cook County Juvenile Probation. And there
Mhm.
I worked with juvenile offenders who had come into contact with the criminal justice system.
Okay.
We had to go out in the community to do therapy with them. So we were going in their homes, in their schools, in their grandmother's house. I mean, it just really depended on where they were. And I learned then that they were experiencing not only coming into the criminal system, but also trauma that they had experienced, which had kind
Mhm.
of led to these criminal activities. So that was kind of like my first introduction into trauma-based work. Um,
Mhm.
and then while I was in Chicago, I worked at a children's center where I tutored there for maybe five or 6 years,
Mhm.
primarily throughout my grad school time. And there, just with the tutoring, you think you just go there to, teach somebody how to read or teach them how to do math. And then the kids start opening up about their stories, and
Mhm.
about the things that they were going through. And so that prompted me to start a girls mentoring program within the center there.
Okay.
And I enlisted the help of my cohort members and some of the women I knew in the community to be mentors to these young ladies. And there we provided psychoeducational groups around self-esteem and how they should talk about their trauma, as far as like narrative therapy and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So that was kind of my introduction, really, into community mental health, trauma based. And then my whole internship year, that's all I did was community mental health, working with adolescents who had experienced a significant amount of trauma in their homes. And a lot of
Okay.
them, most of my division was mostly foster children. So,
Okay.
that,
Okay. And, and so you started with, you said, the girls mentoring program.
mhm.
And can you talk to us about what were some of the things you were seeing? I know you said that as you talked to them, you started to notice that they had some trauma in their history.
Mhm.
But what were some of the signs that
Um,
led you?
Very angry, very aggressive,
Mhm.
very, not, they don't want to trust anybody, coming into this particular center. People have been in this center for generations. So
Okay.
when you have an individual coming in that looks like you finally, right? Because most of the tutors have been primarily Caucasian. They had a difficult time trusting me and trusting, my Caucasian counterparts as well.
Okay.
But they
Hmm.
were very aggressive, very angry, very just kind of, standoffish, really.
Okay.
And then when they start to open up about the things that was going on, it all made sense. So,
Okay. Okay. Do uh, when you so what so when you say, you said that it was showing up in anger. So
mhm,
sometimes we get labeled, you
right.
know,
Hmm.
as Black women, we get labeled as the
Hmm.
angry Black woman,
Right.
right? And so sometimes what I know is sometimes just the way we show up, it may not be anger, but it may look like anger to other communities or other people.
Right.
Um, so when you say that it was showing up, the girls were pretty angry. They didn't trust.
Hmm.
and it kind of let you know that there was trauma. So would you say that as adult women now,
Mm-hmm.
what is it about? Is there a connection between anger and trauma? Because
I think
sometimes I
so.
think we get mislabeled angry,
Right. I
but
think
then
so.
sometimes we are angry and it's okay.
Yeah, I think so many times in our households we've told not to talk about things, right? We've
Okay.
told to put things under the carpet, kind of let me handle it, but it's
Don't you
really
tell
not
nobody
been
what's going on in this house.
exactly right. So then you can't get any help. So then you pin all that stuff up, right? It's all built up, and then it just takes one thing to happen, right? And then you spaz out on somebody, right? And
Mhm.
and then you're labeled as angry or you're aggressive, when really no, I am frustrated, right? I'm sad, I'm hurt. I don't think anger is really an emotion. I think it's stuff underneath that. We just use that as a
Oh, yeah.
so anytime someone says I'm angry, well, let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's go under that. Are you saying are you hurt? Are
Yeah.
you feeling sad? All right, are you feeling scared? So I like to
Okay.
kind of go a little bit deeper into the angry. And with the girls, it was a lot of like irritability too, um,
Okay.
a lot of frustration, very, they would get very upset very quickly, just kind of 0 to 100 really fast. Instead of, and obviously as adolescents, your brain is not fully developed, right? So you that emotional lobe is not fully developed. So you can't say, okay, stop and let me think about this, how this is going to
Mhm.
affect me moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, and when you said that the anger is going to show up, but there's something deeper behind it,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking about something that one of that Pastor Shalita Fomby said in her segment last
Mm-hmm.
week. She talked about her anxiety, and one of the things she made a statement that pain has to have an expression,
Yeah.
and so she talked about it as it related to her anxiety that
Mm-hmm.
she experienced. But would you say that anger sometimes is an expression of pain?
Yes. I would say it's a big expression of pain, especially if you're not able to verbalize how you feel. So one of the things I do within my work is I have emotion sheets, because we can't always see how we feel, right? We might
Okay.
know how we feel, but we don't see it. So I pass out emotion sheets all the time because I want them to be able to identify their emotion, right? And with those
Wow.
emotion sheets, you can do that. So even in my household with my bonus children, we have that, right? I need you to tell me based on this sheet, right? How are you feeling right now? Right? What face
Wow.
matches how you're feeling right now? And it's
Yeah,
helpful because then we know how to move through the situation,
I
right?
like that. I
Yeah.
like that. One of my therapists, I believe in therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had different therapists throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm in grief therapy
Mm-hmm.
with a grief counselor. But prior to going into grief therapy, my therapist, um, the therapist that I had prior to going into grief counseling, I was with for about 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and this was just therapy for me to process life and um, just to make sure I was healthy, in processing ministry and all of that. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that she had me do was journal, but she had me journal in color. So,
Mm-hmm.
so she would say, Tony, when you journal, she had me, I think I had like 5 colors. I had red for when I was angry,
Mm-hmm.
blue if I was feeling like melancholy or
Okay.
down. Um, I had a bright orange or yellow when I was feeling really happy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if I was feeling, then I had a black if I just was feeling like, ugh, blah, that
Okay.
kind of thing. And then I
Mm-hmm.
had a purple that just, it was kind of like, it wasn't, it was just one of those where if I felt good, nothing overly excited about, but just feeling pretty calm. and because for me, lilac and purples that was one of my colors, and she let me
Yeah.
pick that particular color. But yeah, so I had those 4 or 5 colors that I journaled in.
Mhm.
And so when you said we can't always explain how we feel, but we can always what did you say? Articulate
We
our
can't
feelings.
always well, we can't always articulate how we feel. So seeing it sometimes helps.
So seeing it helps.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. Wow. This is so important because a lot of times we don't take time to process our trauma.
Yeah. 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 We have to go on with the day-to-day life, right? We have to take care of our responsibilities. And even as children, especially if you grow up in a home where you are a latchkey kid, right? You got to worry about coming in, making sure you can get in, get your siblings in, it's some cereal or noodles or something. You kind of got to grow up really quickly, and
Hmm.
you don't have time in your childhood to process things. So then you get to your adulthood, and then now you gotta process some stuff. You gotta figure out, why is this affecting me? What is going on? So um, which I think is probably better to do it as an adult anyway, because then you can have true insight into how things impacted you, right? And truly have a conversation.
Let me ask you this.
Mhm.
I know you studied this. I know you went to school, you have master's degrees and doctorates and things of that nature, but do you have a personal experience with this trauma, with trauma and having to process trauma in your life?
Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about my story. So I was raised by my maternal grandmother from ages of 2 to 10. Actually, I'm her namesake. Her name was Cassandra. And in her home, there was a lot of domestic violence. A lot. I've seen her be shot at, I've seen her be beaten on. I have spent countless nights leaving the home, escaping the home, trying to get away from her abuser. I remember one time we had to jump out of a window to get away from him because it was just that bad. But she always made sure we made it to school on time. Always. I never missed a day at school. But it was very traumatic for me because I thought in my mind, this is how a man should treat you, right? So I leave there at 10, and there was no real, I guess, guardianship of me. My grandmother just took me in, right? And that's another part of like historical trauma, but I can talk about that a little later. But there was no formal guardianship of me. And so at 10, I went to live with my biological mother. And I later was adopted. And I'll talk about that too. But going to my biological mother's home was very difficult because she had never been a parent, one. Two, I had never lived with her. I had always known my grandmother. And in that home, there was a lot
And
of
it was your
sexual.
grandmother that was being abused. You were living with
So,
your grandmother who
yeah,
was
and
being abused.
he was being abused. And then I went to live with my biological mother, who was also
Okay.
being abused, right? And then there was sexual abuse that was occurring with me in the home. And that occurred from 11 to 14. So imagine being in a home, sexually abused every single day. So my outlet became school. I didn't rebel or get into anything. I wanted to just stay away from the house. Right. And so that's what I did. I got real involved in school and I got real involved in activities. And that is really what saved my life. Because I knew it was something better. I knew that the hill that I was going through was not the end all be all for me. And then that is when my parents, Regina and Brian, they came in and I went into foster care with them. And then they later adopted me when I was 17. But they changed my life, and my mother, she did not, even though that situation was difficult at 14, just leaving, I had to leave the house that I had known with just the clothes on my back. I didn't have a toothbrush. I didn't have any clothes. I didn't have anything. And that was December 31st of 2004, I believe. So
Wow.
just looking back, at that time, my parents took in a teenager, one, a girl, and she's 14. So can you imagine, what that was like for them as well as for me? But my mother never let me sit in that. She made sure I had the help that I needed. She made
Okay.
sure I went to therapy. She made sure that I was able to have open dialogues with her about things that I was experiencing, because I was introduced to sex so young. So she always had the door open for me to have conversations with her. And even in my adulthood today, right now, I'm getting ready to get married, right? And some of that trauma and stuff still comes up for me at times. But I have a
Okay.
partner that is able to have a conversation with me and not judge me about the things that obviously my personal trauma that I've been through, right? But he tries to have an understanding of that, right? To make sure that we are both always comfortable. And I appreciate that about him. But that is my trauma story.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whew. That's a lot. That's a lot. And here's the thing, Dr. Cassandra, to look at you, no one would be able to see that.
Yeah.
No one would be able to just look at you and point you out in a crowd and
Yeah.
say that she's been sexually abused from
Yeah.
11 to 14, or that she grew up in a house with her grandmother who was abused, her mother
Mhm.
who was abused. She was no one can look at us. And this is why it's so important that we have these critical conversations, because when we look at each other,
Mhm.
or when we see things coming up in our sisters and we wondering, well, she just this or she just that, you don't know what she's been through.
Absolutely.
You don't know
Absolutely.
her story. You don't know what's in her background. What historical trauma
Yeah.
has she been through?
Yeah.
To look at you today, you're a well accomplished woman.
Thank you.
You've gone to school, back
Mhm.
to school, and
Right.
accomplished so much academically, professionally. You've
Yeah.
accomplished now, getting ready to get married, and all of that. And so but in your background there is trauma.
Yes, ma'am.
There's historical trauma that's had to
Mhm.
be resolved, and
Mhm. Mhm.
probably continuously. I heard you say even now it
Yeah.
comes up, so it's
Yeah.
not like we get to resolve it today and then it's
That's right.
gone.
Exactly.
So it's a continuation. We're
Mhm.
constantly resolving, we're constantly evolving, we're
Yep.
constantly working it out.
All the time. All the time. And if you don't have insight into that, there is no way that you're going to be able to have a relationship with anybody, really, an interpersonal relationship with women, with men, with children. If you don't have insight into how your trauma triggers you, you have to be very aware of that.
Mm. Insight into how your trauma triggers you. I
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? How do we get insight into how our trauma triggers us? Tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that.
So therapy, number one, is my go-to, right?
Okay.
So, like I said, I did therapy as a teenager, and then I didn't do therapy again until probably 2019, and that was because my godmother, who was the greatest woman I've ever met, she was murdered, just just taken away from us, and it affected me so much. It felt like I lost a parent because she had been with me through all of that stuff, and to have her just taken away without any reasons, it just did something to me. And I was like, okay. And at the time, I was working, in a detention facility with, murderers, rapists, and I was like, this is just too much for me, right? So I went back into therapy because I did not want to be at work looking at the offenders that I worked with. Like, I can't help you. I can't do this. Even though that was my life's dream. So I decided to go back into therapy, and it was the greatest thing I've ever done, is to be able to talk about that experience, what it was like for me. And it took me, and she even took me way back to my trauma, You know, I'm like, well, girl. And at that point, I was like, I already talked about that. I don't need to talk about that no more. We talked about this murder that happened, you know.
Right.
But I'm so glad that she did, because she was able to make some connections for me, you know. And one of the things she said was, you've always had violence in your life. And it was like an aha moment. I was like, oh my God, she is right.
I mean, but I know you know the thread, but you're revealing the thread right here in the podcast, because I've heard you talk about your grandmother, your mother. Then what happened to you was violent. Right? Then your godmother was murdered. There's this trail of violence.
I mean, exactly. And until she said that, I had to acknowledge that. I had to sit in that and say, this is where the cycle ends, right? So with my children, we're not doing that.
Did y'all hear what she said? This is where the cycle ends. You said you made a decision, right?
I made a decision.
So what do you say to the woman who is having a hard time making that decision? Because we're at the end of September.
Yes.
And we're going into the month of November. And you know, November is, you know, first of all, every day and every month should be something about domestic violence, because it's happening every day. Absolutely. It's happening right now.
Absolutely.
While we're on this podcast. I think it's every 9 minutes a woman is murdered, right? Something like that. Every 1 to 3 women that you meet has been sexually or verbally or mentally or physically abused. Or in those kind of environments. And so we're going into the month of October, and there'll be a lot of conversations around domestic violence and all of that. So what do you say to the woman who's listening to this podcast, who has historical trauma related to violence, related to sexual abuse, mental abuse, or whatever kind of trauma that we've experienced? Because I mean, all of us have had trauma. I've not had sexual abuse trauma, but I've had trauma in my life, right? And so what do you say to the woman who's having a hard time making that decision?
It is okay, completely okay, to give up everything that you have to start over, because stuff is stuff, right? You can always go find another bag. You can always go find another man. You don't need to stay in that, right? You are enough. You are more than enough. Yeah, your thoughts matter, right? Your life matters. Somebody in this world needs you, right? And being in that type of environment is not suitable for you or for your children. If you have kids, staying for the kids is an excuse.
Right.
Staying for you and saving your life is important, so you can tell your story, right? My mother always tell me, you need to tell your story to other people, because that's the only way other people gonna learn. Right, you gotta.
I'm so glad you're telling your story on this podcast today, because I believe that somebody that's listening to this podcast today is getting set free as we talk about resolving historical trauma. And it's so important, because many of us have trauma in our history. And if we don't learn to process that or name that or look at that, no matter how painful it might be, then we're bound to repeat that cycle. In ourselves, or with our children, our grandchildren, and the like. And that's why I'm so glad that you're here talking with us today about this. So this is a self-care podcast. So how does historical trauma impact our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health? Can you talk to us about that?
I can. I prepared a little something. I was like, okay, let me. So historical trauma, as you said, impacts our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health, right? So mental, it can come out in stress, right? Depression, any type of mood disorders, such as like bipolar, anxiety disorders. People tend to get fixated on their trauma, where they are that they can't socialize and go out. Okay. self-destructive behaviors such as drinking alcohol, using different substances. And then some people, and will have suicidal ideation, so they're thinking about harming themselves, or they have some sort of suicidal attempt. So that's how it really impacts us mentally. And then emotionally, that can lead to low self-esteem, low self-worth, a lack of self-care. You can become angry, aggressive, irritable. It can cause a lot of self-blame. And then it can also cause the imposter syndrome.
And
a
little bit more about that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, so I think I struggled with the imposter syndrome probably after I graduated with my doctorate. And at that point, I grew up in the inner city of Cleveland, where most people don't get out of the inner city. They don't get out of that particular environment. And I felt so much guilt for making it and for arriving to this pinnacle of my educational career. And then I felt that way again when I got my dream job. And I felt like, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I'm not good enough. And it makes you feel like you're an imposter. When really you're not an imposter. I done did all this work to get to where I am. I worked hard. I had sleepless nights, headaches. My leg hurt, my back hurt. I did a lot of stuff to get here.
And here's the real deal. So the historical trauma that because of your history of trauma, that probably made you feel less than, unworthy, not good enough. Because if you don't resolve that, then when I do get somewhere, then why am I here? I don't deserve to be here.
Exactly. And it goes back to slavery. I mean, really, that's where all our historical trauma started. Is right when that event in history happened. That's when everything started for us, right?
Wow.
Because it was passed down from generation to generation. And people don't really understand or want to make that connection when really it's a connection, right? I was raised by my grandmother, right? And slavery, the kids didn't have a choice but to go to the grandparent because the parents was being taken away by the slave owners.
Wow.
Right. And then it goes into the Great Migration. You had kids staying with their grandparents because why? Because the parents was going up north to make a better life for them.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And then after that, you have the crack epidemic in the 80s. Right. So then now the parents is all on crack and the kids is all with the grandparents. It's just,
girl, you are unpacking the history of it. I hear you. Go ahead.
I mean, it's just, and I spent a lot of time just reading, right, and understanding where I came from, And I think when I went to Africa, that changed my life. It changed how I saw and viewed things in my own personal life, right?
Yes.
And how it affects African Americans in general.
Same here. Going to Africa was one of the most awakening experiences for me. Each time that I've gone. It's been my last time was in 2019 when I went to South Africa. Prior to that, I went to Kenya twice, and I've been to Ethiopia. And like I said, 2019, I did South Africa, Johannesburg and Cape Town. And I'm telling you, it is the most awakening experience every time I go.
Every time. Did you go to the slave castles by any chance? Yes. Oh my God. Best experience I ever had.
Yeah. I'm telling you, I'm telling you, really helping us. So you said you talked about how it impacts us mentally, emotionally.
All right. So then physically, right? So then here we go. So you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, right? So then we start to, and that African Americans are what? Genetically predisposed, right? So I read a study the other day that historical trauma, racism even impacts babies in the utero. So when they're in the womb, they feel their mother's racial discrimination. They feel that historical trauma, right?
So we're dealing with, as Dr. Sienna Lee said, we're dealing with post-slavery traumatic disorder, like PTSD, post-slavery traumatic disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a real thing. And so, and same thing that Deanna Boyd talked about with us, what our mother was feeling while she was carrying us.
Yep.
So
Yep.
if she was feeling racially profiled or discriminated against or microaggressions or whatever at work, and she's carrying you come out feeling that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you are in that. You feel all of that. We feel everything that our mothers experienced. We feel all of that. All right. So I often think my biological mother, she had to be a warrior because that's all I do is worry. she had to be a warrior because all I do is worry and ruminate, like, oh, how I'm gonna do this, how this gonna happen, how. At times I have to be like, okay, now I just got to get under control now because there's too much worrying happening. So
I hear you. You are helping us, Dr. Cassandra Simmons. Wow.
Well, I'm trying.
Anything else?
Yes,
Anything else physically?
Nothing else physically. And then for the spiritual health, it can decrease your sense of purpose, your lack of connection with religious affiliations, and then it's an absence of your prayer life. So it impacts
again, please. Go back to all three of those. I think you gave like 3 or 4 there.
Yeah.
Say them again.
Can decrease your sense of purpose, lack of connection with your religious affiliation, and then an absence of prayer life.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Whoo.
So yes, it impacts a lot. Our whole being. Yeah.
And this is why we have to resolve historical trauma. So, Dr. Simmons, what can we do? What self-care practices can we involve ourselves in that will help us? I know you said therapy, but are there any other things we can do to help us?
Yeah, so I love having positive affirmations around my house. In the morning on my bathroom mirror, I have a positive affirmation or a mantra that I quote to myself while I'm getting ready.
Okay.
So I think having one of those that you are enough, you are smart, your thoughts matter. I think having those things, seeing those things will help resolve the historical trauma of lifting your self-confidence up, right? We've been beaten down so much that it's time for us to lift ourselves up, right? Control how you confront historical trauma, right? So oftentimes we are very tired or it's very exhausting explaining our experience, right? But you control how you confront it, but do it in a way that is best for you.
Okay. Can you give just a little example of that? Of how doing it in a way that's best for you, like maybe from your own life.
Yeah. So I actually had something happen today. Actually, I felt I was being undermined at work. That things were happening without a discussion with me being included in that. And so I finally sat down and just wrote an email and said, "Look, this is how I feel that this has impacted my work. Right? Here is an article to explain or back up why I feel this way. Please read it in your leisure so we can know how to move forward, right? So I've given you the tools on what I feel is the best way to approach me and how we can deal with a situation, right? Because there's a lot of microaggressions, right? Without you, and microaggressions are unintentional, right? I do believe some people don't know what they're doing, right? And there are other people who do know, right?
Yeah.
But I believe this person genuinely did not know that they were doing that, right?
Okay.
And at the end of that, they were extremely grateful that I sent them the research that I did on microaggressions and what it's like for me to work in this type of environment.
Okay.
So I control how I dealt with that. Right. I didn't CC nobody or per my last email. You know how we like to do.
Yeah.
I didn't do that.
Okay.
Setting boundaries is very important. It's very important. Engaging in prayer or mindfulness or meditation, whichever one enjoys. Of course, exercising and drinking plenty of water. That is also important. And I said attending therapy and then listening to uplifting podcasts just like this one. It's
Okay.
important what's going in your mind, right?
Yeah.
What you're taking in is important.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are some of the things that I have.
Whew. You have helped us today. This conversation has been, it actually exceeded my expectations. Not that I had no expectations,
Yeah.
but it lifted me in such a way. Just listening to you, watching you, hearing your story, and then watching where you are today, and the valuable strategies, self-care strategies that you gave us in how to resolve historical trauma in our lives, and hopefully not just um, help us with ourselves, but then help us help others.
People.
Because
Right.
isn't that what it's all about?
Yes, it is. It's helping other
You know,
people. Yeah.
it's that's what it's all about. God put us in the earth to help. I'm just thinking of the conversation between Peter and Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
my principal work is pastor, and so a biblicist and theologian. So I'm always throw some Bible in there somewhere.
Right.
One one conversation that Jesus had with Peter, and he said to Peter, Satan has desired to have you and to sift you as wheat, but I pray for you that your faith fail not. But then he says to Peter, and when you are converted, strengthen your brother.
Yeah.
And so that's what this podcast is about. Because I've been converted in terms of my own historical trauma,
Yeah.
in terms of um, my self-care, my health, my wellness. And that's what this podcast flows out of. It
Yeah.
flows out of my desire to help my sisters
Yeah.
and my brothers who are listening to this podcast. Dr. Simmons, you have helped us. I want everyone to find find out how they can find you. And so I'm putting here your information, your name on the screen. Listen, you all, if you're not watching us on YouTube, you need to travel over to YouTube. If you're listening to this podcast, you are listening to the Harmonize Your Life Conversations on Self-Care for Women of Color podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google. You can find us on the Light Internet Radio there. You can listen to us there as well. You also can watch this podcast on YouTube. So I do want you to go there to my YouTube channel, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that my YouTube channel can get more. If I get more subscribers, then more of these conversations will come up when
Yeah.
people go onto YouTube. That's how when you go on YouTube and there are certain things that automatically suggested to you and certain material, it's because it's gotten a lot of attention and a lot of likes. And so we want this kind of information to be out there more readily available for our people. And YouTube is the number one search engine right now. YouTube is the number one search engine. So go to my YouTube channel, like and subscribe so you'll be made aware when more podcast episodes like this one are uploaded to our YouTube channel. All right. Listen, ladies, I also want you to join the Harmonize Your Life Women's Self-Care Network. Join our network. You can go to my website at drtonialvarado.com and you will find the link to the Self-Care Network there. I do want you to do that. I want you to join the Self-Care Network. Go to my website, join the Harmonize Your Life Self-Care Network. I have a fitness challenge coming up in the month of October 1st through the 31st. You can go there. And while you're there, go on and purchase your fitness apparel, your Harmony fitness apparel. As you see, Dr. Simmons is wearing herself. Yes, you rocking it, girl. And I'm gonna have to get them earrings you wearing with mine. I need to, next time I wear my shirt, I need some earrings like that. I like those. All right, so she's rocking my bling t-shirt today, and I appreciate that. And so, listen, go there, go to my website, and support this work because I believe this is very good work that we are doing. Dr. Cassandra Simmons is our dialogue partner today, and I want you to know who she is. I want you to go to her website at Dr. Simmons Speaks. It's at drsimmons.com. drsimmons.com. Go, her organization is entitled Dr. Simmons Speaks. Look her up, Google her, Dr. Simmons Speaks. You can find her on Facebook at Cassandra Lindsay. Am I saying that right?
Lanice.
Lanice,
Mhm.
Cassandra Lanice, or you can follow her on Instagram at Dr. Cassandra.Lanice. Dr. Cassandra.Lanice. And listen, if you go to her, go to YouTube, you'll see all of this displayed there on the screen on YouTube. I know sometimes when you're listening to the podcast, you may not get the spelling correct or something like that. If you're listening audio, I know a lot of you listen to our podcast while you're walking in the park, and we want you to do that, or while you're driving down the street. But also take time to go to YouTube and watch the podcast, so you can get the information that you need, so you can follow our guests. We always have dynamic guests on this podcast, and certainly Dr. Cassandra Simmons has blessed us on today. Dr. Simmons, I'm going to just ask if you'll give us one last word of encouragement. I'm going to come out of the stream and just leave you up there for a minute to give us one last point of encouragement about resolving historical trauma.
All right. So always remember to invite yourself back into the moment. Taking care of you, your health, your wellness requires you to stay present in your current moment and not focus on anything when you find yourself thinking about tasks, people, or work. You are not present in the moment of yourself, but that of others. So just remember to invite yourself back into the moment and take each day as it comes.
Wow. Remember to invite yourself back into the moment and take each day, you said?
As it comes.
As it comes. Don't forget that, y'all. Invite yourself back into that's what this is about. Harmonize your life. This conversations on self-care. Self-care is not selfishness. And I always say self-care is not only a gift to yourself, but it is a gift to everybody in your world. Right. Everybody that you touch, everybody that you come in contact with, that you lead at work, that you everybody in your family who you care for, at church who you lead, whatever. Because when you're whole, you minister from a whole place. When you're healthy, you minister, you lead from a healthy place. When you resolve trauma, you don't pass it on to your children and your children's children, and down to the third and the fourth generation. Thank you so much, Dr. Cassandra Simmons, for blessing us today. Listen, we'll see you next week on another episode or another conversation on self-care for women of color with your host, Dr. Toni G. Alvarado. Hi, this is Dr. Toni Alvarado, and I want to personally invite you to join the Harmonize Your Life Women's Self-Care Network. Join us for fitness motivation, health and wellness information, inspiration, self-care strategies, and ideas for creating harmony in your life. As a certified health and wellness coach, it is one of my greatest honors to support women in their fitness, health, wellness, and self-care goals. Join the Harmonize Your Life Women's Self-Care Network, and we will do you good on your journey.